Thank you, Michael. First, I want to start off by saying congratulations to the Atlanta blockchain. You guys got your registered trademark, so congratulations for that. So as Michael said, my name is Stan Sater. I'm with Founders Legal. And so it's been a couple months. Jeff last spoke here in December. And so it's been a couple months since that. So I just kind of wanted to give a legal update since then. And so I work in our corporate and IP group, and part of our practice is securities, and we've done a few ICOs. And so today what I want to do is give a quick June and July update, talk about the changing mood in Washington, some litigation updates primarily around BitConnect and what's been in the news around that, and then do a global wrap up because there has been a lot of regulation in the overseas markets. So June and July, this past week, the SEC has been bombarded with emails over the Bitcoin ETF. Square also got a bit license. How many people here know what the bit license is? Yeah, so they're the 9th ever business to get a bit license, which is pretty big. So now using Square's Cash App, which is kind of the equivalent of their Venmo, you can trade Bitcoin. But we can't here in Georgia because our regulations don't allow it. And then also this week, Coin-Operated Capitalism is a paper that came out from legal scholars from Penn, and they looked at the top 50 ICOs of 2017, and they found drastic mismatches between what was written in white papers and what was actually coded into the smart contracts. And the reason that's kind of important is because in a community where we kind of we build ourselves up as self-regulated and trustlessness, it turns out for these ICOs, we tend to trust the developers a lot. And so, but that hasn't stopped the mood in Washington. They're playing catch up right now. They realize that cryptocurrency isn't going away. FinTech more broadly isn't going away. So they're repositioning themselves, and they're trying to bridge the gap between this technology and DC. And so the argument now has changed, where the argument is, the United States is really a price discovery mechanism for a lot of goods. The US is not the largest producer of cotton, nor is it of oil. And so that price is discovered here on the US markets, and that should be the same for Bitcoin. And the Department of Justice, when they seize Bitcoin, they actually sell that back at auction for millions of dollars. And then from the SEC standpoint, they came here to Atlanta in June and talked to us. They want to be more public. They want to communicate via email and on the phone. And so the SEC, they're important because they really, sorry, a little technical detail. The SEC has 3 main objectives to protect investors. They maintain fair and orderly, efficient markets, facilitating the capital formation that is necessary to sustain economic growth. And so, yeah. So the test that they use, kind of the SEC, is to go through these ICOs has been related to Howey. And the Howey company was selling citrus, their orange farms. And what they were doing was they were selling land plots, and in exchange, these people were getting promised returns. And that's not okay from the SEC standpoint. The SEC says that an investment contract is an investment of money in a common enterprise with the expectation of profits solely from the efforts of others. And that's how they judge what securities are. So in this space, we have a lot of utility tokens. And the SEC says, we really don't care what you call it. We're going to start with the Howey test. And right now, sorry. And so what we've done is we've gone through the Howey test twice now with Bitcoin and Ethereum, and the SEC has said that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities. And they've said they've been sufficiently decentralized. But the difference is that decentralization to them is not the same as technical decentralization. And what they say is there's a lack of a central third party whose efforts are key to the project's success. And then what they tack on is, why are people buying this, right? So we have Teslas and people are prepaying for a lot of Teslas, but we're not saying Tesla is issuing securities. So we look at the economic substance of the transaction and we try and understand why people are buying the tokens, what they're buying, what rights are associated with that. So we now know that Bitcoin and Ethereum are not securities, but that doesn't mean that they're not regulated. And primarily what we're looking at right now with Bitcoin, and as the community matures into other financial markets, is the CFTC. And so this year we saw the futures being traded with Bitcoin, and we're expecting more financial options to come out. And so the CFTC, they primarily regulate commodities, futures, derivatives, and swaps. And so in March, a judge for the District Court in New York ruled that virtual currencies can be regulated by the CFTC as commodities. And since then, they've become more public in their customer advisories. And they've even set up a lab called Lab CFTC to pull apart the technology and really understand it. And this week, in front of Congress, the director of the Lab CFTC, he said, it's only when we start to see the rise of futures swaps built on those commodities that we have oversight, and they really don't want to rush to hasty regulations. That's not their agenda. They realize if they're too fast, they're going to miss the mark, and they're going to have unintended consequences, and more companies are going to move overseas, and they're going to lose that price discovery action that happens with Bitcoin trading. And so what we see now is that that's the SEC and the CFTC as regulators, but we need to also pay attention to prosecutors. And the way that we're seeing litigation play out in this space is it can broadly be in three buckets: Ponzi schemes, securities litigation, and criminal actions. And so in that vein, US regulators are starting to team up, and they're partnering the Department of Justice and FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Unit. They levied a $110 million penalty against the Bitcoin exchange. And then the Centra ICO was fined $32 million by the SEC, and then the Department of Justice also prosecuted them with a criminal case. And also, more importantly, just because you move overseas, just because you move your company overseas does not mean that you're not subject to US laws. And we're seeing more and more collaboration between the US and other regulators. And so, Michael, you wanted to know a little bit more about BitConnect and how that's playing out. And yeah. Yeah, so how many people here know what BitConnect is? I've heard of that scam. Does anyone want to explain it? Anyone? Yeah. Forgot to include it. But anyone want to explain what BitConnect was? Michael, you talked about BitConnect as a scam, back in November?
Yeah, so we covered BitConnect, and I think I called it a pyramid scheme or Ponzi, or I can't necessarily remember what we called it at the time, but it was essentially a service where you put money in, and then I think they said they had a trading bot. Was it a lending platform? I thought it was something where they had like some kind of interest rate based on they had like a trade bot as well.
Yeah, so it was kind of both, right? So they had this affiliate program that was kind of structured as a little bit like a pyramid scheme, where the more and more people you signed up, the more and more Bitcoin you got. You know, you got these three guys, Trevor James, Crypto Nick, and Craig Grant, that were kind of pushing this along. And then also you had promised returns of up to 1% a day. So you could get around 40% a month just by doing nothing. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine. And so they were registered in the UK, and the UK issued them, basically cease and desist, and they said upon dissolution, we get everything that you have. And now, because they did have US people buying their token and putting money behind this, now there are a bunch of class actions that are piling up, primarily in Florida. But the problem is there's a low probability of recovery. The founders still can't be found. So in all actuality, the news that you're seeing, there's a low probability that there's going to be any recovery, right? Bernie Madoff, Jordan Belfort, all those investors still haven't been made full. And what's more, too, is that the way that the SEC and these other regulators work is that there's a lot under seal. And what I mean by that is they take time to investigate, they have to present their case in front of all 5 commissioners, and then those commissioners decide how to proceed, whether they want to issue a penalty or a fine, whether they want to go after them criminally. And so it takes many, many years. Theranos, for example, has been in the news. Well, that was under seal for many, many years before we got to today. And so, kind of our questions, Trevor James, Crypto Nick, Craig Grant, they've been served and they've been cooperating with the FBI and the SEC. And so about their involvement, questioning whether they were broker-dealers, which brings into a whole nother set of laws where they do not want to be. YouTube was brought in for being negligent, for because there were thousands, tens of thousands of hours of these BitConnect videos, and it got to the point where they were actually part of their ad affiliate program, so YouTube was monetizing off the ads being shown on BitConnect. But the thing is, there's something called the Communications Decency Act, so I do not expect YouTube to be liable going forward. And so lastly, I just wanted to talk about this global wrap-up of what's going on. China has been talking a lot about blockchain. They're set to release some blockchain standards coming next year. They're very big proponents of fintech. They're big proponents of blockchain. However, as many of you might know, they have a ban on cryptocurrency, so the average Chinese citizen cannot just buy and sell cryptocurrency, and they're facing a lot of pressure to lift that ban. In Europe, this past month, Malta passed 3 very pro-blockchain, pro-cryptocurrency laws. And so if you guys have used Binance, right, they moved their European headquarters to Malta. But it's important to note that these rules are not enforced yet. They still have to draft something that they're calling a framework about how they're going to implement these regulations. So it's not enforced yet. The UK is starting to research law reform around smart contracts, how that can play into their own legal system. And then Japan in April issued guidelines around ICOs, and South Korea is considering tax revisions around cryptocurrency and benefits to South Korean companies that are playing with nascent technologies, primarily Bitcoin being one of them. So just want to say thank you, and I'm curious to hear your questions.
What's your take on Ripple and the chances of it being deemed an ICO or security?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, right? Because we have Bitcoin and Ethereum, and if you just go down the list on CoinMarketCap, they've pretty much gone 1-2. That's not indicative that they're looking at CoinMarketCap and seeing Ripple as number 3 and going, now it's their turn to be looked at. But we do have the Howey test, which is an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits solely from the efforts of others. So if we run through that test, we don't quite know how it's going to come out, but it's something we've been pulling apart definitely in our talks at Founders Legal around common enterprise and from the efforts of others. But they're looking at that test too, and that test can get very quickly nuanced.
So is there such thing as a legal ICO in the U.S.?
The goal is to do your best efforts. And there are, under the Jobs Act, there are a few exemptions that you can use, Reg D, Reg S, Regulation A+, and Reg CF. And so, the world is not struggling to prosecute financial crimes. That's just not the case. And regulators are not looking for a gotcha moment if you're doing an ICO. They have a lot of other financial crime that they can be prosecuting. And so, if you do your best efforts, you put the disclosures in, you engage with legal counsel early and often, and you demonstrate how you try to comply with the laws, we think they'll look a little bit more favorably.
Hi. Can you tell us, hi, I'm here. Can you tell us if you see any efficiencies in tokenized securities at all, as opposed to if I want to launch something and I know it's going to be a security, why in the hell should I use a blockchain? Can I just do it the normal way? Is there some efficiency to using tokenized security?
In the sense of that you want a broader range of people to interact with your token offering. I mean, we're about to see a giant wave of security offerings. And Reg A+, if you're willing to call it a security, Reg A+ is definitely a viable route to go where you can raise up to $50 million in a 12-month time period from unaccredited investors. So you can offer it to the public initially from the standpoint.
All right, we'll take 2 more questions and we'll go to the next talk.
So with a project like EOS that's hiding in plain sight and obviously a security and obviously evading security laws by their behavior, do you think somebody like that would be made an example of?
We certainly don't know. They have 21 block producers, but again, technical decentralization is not the same as SEC's decentralization. Raising $4 billion is a lot, and something that they look at is the lack of a central third party whose efforts are key to the project's success. Right, so we have Bitcoin, we have Ethereum. If the Bitcoin Foundation goes away, if the Ethereum Foundation goes away, there's a good chance that Bitcoin's gonna keep running. People are gonna keep maintaining that code, and people are gonna keep using it. So that's kind of why perhaps they were more comfortable saying, well, this isn't a security, because really who's behind Bitcoin, who's keeping it going? Well, it's the full nodes on the network. It's the people actually using it. There is no, when you trade Bitcoin, the proceeds aren't going to Bitcoin Foundation. And so with EOS, we really don't know how it's going to play out.
Hey, thanks for the talk. So you spoke briefly about the ETF application. I know there were a couple of ETF applications that came last year that the SEC asked for them all to be pulled, and I read this week that Van Eck just submitted an application. There have been a lot of good opinions. Can you briefly kind of discuss what the distinction is this year, or the applications now, that might allow us to see an ETF, and what your chances, what you think the chances are of seeing an ETF this year?
Yeah, so they've pushed the decision off to the ETF. I definitely think the more that you bombard them with emails, the more that you show this is a product you want, I think it holds higher weight in their regards. Because again, the SEC does not want to shut this down. Their mandate is to facilitate capital formation and watch over the markets. And they want people investing in the markets. Their whole goal is to facilitate free and open trading, and that means full and fair disclosures. And so a product like an ETF potentially could bring more people into the traditional securities markets. We saw with Chris Giancarlo, the CFTC chair, when he went in front of Congress, he said, my niece is a hodler of Bitcoin, and she's never been interested in traditional financial markets, but now she's asking me questions. So for a lot of people of a younger generation, this is their entry point into bigger things. So potentially if a Bitcoin ETF and people can show that that's an entry point, it probably holds better weight. And the fact that Bitcoin and other virtual currencies have gone mainstream this past year, we've gotten away from it being only used for crimes. So I think if not this year, it's coming soon. I think it's them becoming more public and engaging with the public, and then as I pointed to in the first slide, where there's this changing mood. They don't want to miss out, and so they want to be a part of this because they realize that they've missed out in the beginning. But even from 2013, FinCEN said that Bitcoin isn't illegal. how it's being used by criminals is illegal. So I think the more people like yourself in the barbershop that are accepting Bitcoin actively for honest goods and services, I think that sways.
So we're going to have one brief mention by Linda, and then we're going to move on to the next speaker. Thank you so much, Stan, for coming out. And just a brief comment from Linda or Yuri or whoever you want to say this is from.
The ETFs have a chance because a major insurance provider is stepping up saying that they're willing to insure the ETF. So you'll hear more about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.